I've always considered myself a people person, someone who can walk into any room and find something to laugh about. But tonight, standing on the rooftop lounge of Chicago's trendiest hotel, I felt like an outsider looking in. The air was thick with expensive cologne and polite laughter, punctuated by the clinking of champagne glasses. It wasn't my scene, but it was Troy's world. And as his wife, I'd learned to play the part. Troy had been talking up this work party for weeks. "It's important," he'd said, adjusting his tie in the mirror earlier that evening. "This is where impressions are made." He didn't need to tell me twice. I knew how much his career meant to him. So here I was, dressed in a black cocktail dress that cost more than I cared to admit, nodding along to conversations about quarterly reports and market trends. The trouble started when Troy's boss, Greg, a tall man with a booming voice and an even bigger ego, took center stage at our table. He launched into one of his infamous rants about company policies, insisting that employees should work smarter, not harder. Most of the group nodded obediently, but Troy leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "You're oversimplifying it," he said, his tone measured but firm. "If we don't address the root causes of inefficiency, no amount of smart work will fix the problem." Greg chuckled dismissively. "Root causes? Come on, Troy. Sometimes you just need to trust leadership, to know what's best." That's when I opened my mouth and sealed my fate. "Exactly," I chimed in, forcing a light laugh. "Leadership always knows best, right?" For a split second, everyone laughed, including Greg. But then I saw Troy's expression freeze. His eyes locked onto mine, sharp and accusing, as if I'd stabbed him in the back instead of making a harmless joke. My stomach dropped. By the time we got home, his anger had simmered into something far colder. "How could you do that?" he demanded, pacing the living room. "In front of everyone? Do you have any idea how that made me look?" "I was just joking," I stammered, though my voice lacked conviction. You know I didn't mean anything by it. But Troy wasn't listening. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out the door without another word, leaving me alone in the silence of our too-perfect suburban house. As I sat there staring at the empty doorway, I couldn't shake the feeling that this fight wasn't really about a joke. Something deeper was brewing beneath the surface. Something I hadn't wanted to see until now. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered if I truly knew the man I'd married. The house felt suffocating after Troy left. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the weight of everything unsaid between us, pressing down on me like a storm cloud threatening to burst. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the clock as the minutes ticked by. 1 hour turned into 2, then 3. He didn't call or text. For all I knew, he might not even come back tonight. I told myself it was fine, that we'd argued before and always found our way back to each other. But this time felt different. This time, there was no immediate apology from him, no softening in his voice when he finally walked through the door. Just silence stretching endlessly between us. To distract myself, I wandered into the kitchen and poured a glass of wine. As I sipped it, my mind drifted back to earlier incidents, moments where Troy had reacted with similar intensity over what seemed like small things. Like the time I teased him about his obsession with fantasy football during a family dinner, or when I accidentally mentioned his fear of public speaking in front of his colleagues. Each time he'd brushed it off afterward, but now those memories felt sharper, more deliberate. Maybe it wasn't just sensitivity. Maybe it was insecurity. Or worse, something deeper that I hadn't allowed myself to see. As I rinsed out the wine glass, my gaze landed on Troy's phone sitting on the counter. He must have forgotten it in his haste to leave. A pang of guilt shot through me at the thought of invading his privacy, but curiosity quickly took hold. What if there was something, anything, that could explain why he'd reacted so strongly? Tonight? My fingers trembled as I unlocked the screen. His password was still my birthday, a fact that made my chest tighten. I scrolled through recent texts, half expecting nothing unusual. But then I saw it. A thread labeled Lila. The first few messages were innocuous enough. Casual greetings, updates about work projects. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. "Miss you," one read. Another said, "Can't stop thinking about last week." My breath caught in my throat. Last week? What happened last week? I sank onto the couch, clutching the phone like it might burn me. Lila. Who was she? And why did her name feel like a punch to the gut? For a moment, I considered deleting the messages, pretending I'd never seen them. But the damage was done. The cracks in our marriage weren't just beneath the surface anymore. They were splitting wide open, revealing secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to face. When Troy finally came home hours later, slipping quietly through the front door, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't bear to look at him. Not yet. Not until I figured out how much of our life together was built on lies. As I lay there listening to him move around the room, I realized something unsettling. The man I thought I knew might not exist at all. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that no amount of coffee could shake. Troy was already gone, his side of the bed cold and untouched. He must have left early, avoiding me again. The silence between us had grown into something tangible, like a wall neither of us knew how to tear down. I tried to focus on mundane tasks, folding laundry, watering the plants, but my mind kept circling back to Lila. Who was she? What did she mean to him? And why hadn't Troy ever mentioned her before? Every unanswered question felt like another brick added to the wall separating us. Unable to sit still any longer, I decided to do something reckless. Dig deeper. If Troy wouldn't give me answers, maybe someone else would. I opened his phone again, guilt gnawing at me but not enough to stop. This time, I scrolled through his call log and found Lila's number saved under work colleague. Work colleague? My stomach churned at the thought of what that label might really mean. I hesitated for a moment, then dialed the number. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, bright and cheerful. "Hello? Hi, is this Lila?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best effort to sound casual. "Yes, who's this?" Her tone shifted slightly. More guarded now. "It's Danielle," I said quickly. "Troy's wife." There was a pause, long enough to make my heart race. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost hesitant. "Oh, hi, Danielle. How can I help you?" "I'm sorry to bother you," I began, choosing my words carefully. "But I noticed some messages between you and Troy, and I just wanted to understand what's going on. You two seem close." Another pause. Then quietly, "Danielle, I think you should talk to Troy about this. It's complicated." Complicated. That one word hit me like a punch to the gut. Complicated didn't sound like innocent work banter. Complicated sounded like late-night texts and lingering glances. Complicated sounded like betrayal. "I appreciate your honesty," I managed to say, though my voice cracked. "Thank you for your time." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank screen, trying to process what I'd just heard. By the time Troy came home that evening, I'd rehearsed my confrontation a dozen times in my head. But when he walked through the door, looking tired and disheveled, my resolve wavered. For a moment I considered letting it go, pretending I didn't know anything. After all, ignorance might be easier than facing whatever truth lay ahead. But then he looked at me, his eyes wary but unreadable, and something inside me snapped. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He froze, keys still in hand. "About what?" "Lila," I said simply, watching his face for any sign of reaction. For a split second, panic flickered across his features. Then he sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Danielle, I can explain." "Good," I replied, crossing my arms. "Because I'm listening." And for the first time in years, I truly was. Troy's explanation came in fits and starts, like pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to put together. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands gripping the edge as if it might steady him. For a moment, he tried to deny everything, claiming, "Lila was just a colleague," insisting the texts were innocent, but one look at my face told him I wasn't buying it. Finally, he broke. "It happened months ago," he admitted, his voice low and strained. "We were working late on a project, and things got complicated. It didn't mean anything, Danielle. I ended it before it went too far." "Before it went too far?" I echoed, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. "How far? Did it have to go for you to realize it was wrong? Did you ever think about how this would affect us?" He looked away, shame written all over his face. "I messed up. I know that. But I stopped because I love you. Because I wanted to fix things with us." His words should have comforted me, but they only made me angrier. Fix things? As if walking away from an affair could erase the damage it had already done. "And what about tonight?" I demanded. "You storm out after I make a stupid joke, leaving me alone without an explanation. Was that part of your grand plan to fix things?" "I wasn't thinking clearly," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I felt humiliated, Danielle. Seeing you side with Greg in front of everyone, it brought back all these feelings I've been trying to bury. I couldn't handle it." "So this is my fault now?" I shot back, incredulous. "Because I made a joke at a party? Troy, people make jokes all the time. They don't run off to cheat on their spouses or leave their wives stranded at home." The room fell silent after that, the weight of my words hanging between us. I could see the guilt eating away at him, but it wasn't enough to undo what had already been broken. That night, I lay awake long after Troy had fallen into a restless sleep. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. When had we stopped being honest with each other? When had trust become so fragile that a single joke, or a secret affair, could shatter it completely? By morning, I'd made a decision. If Troy thought he could sweep this under the rug and move on like nothing happened, he was wrong. I deserved better than that. I started small, reaching out to old friends I hadn't spoken to in years, reconnecting over coffee or phone calls. Their laughter reminded me of who I used to be before I poured every ounce of myself into supporting Troy's career. Then I signed up for a painting class, a hobby I'd abandoned when life got too busy. At first, my brush strokes were clumsy, but soon I found solace in the colors and textures, in creating something entirely my own. One evening, as I stood back to admire a half-finished canvas, Troy walked into the living room. He hesitated, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're really good at that," he said finally, his tone softer than it had been in weeks. "Thanks," I replied, not looking at him. "I miss you," he added quietly. For a moment, I considered letting those 3 words unravel me, but instead I turned to face him, meeting his gaze head-on. "I miss who we were too," I said. "But maybe it's time we both figure out who we are now." The truth hurt more than I expected, but it also set me free. The days that followed were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, clarity, and even moments of unexpected peace. I spent hours in therapy, unraveling years of compromises and sacrifices I'd made for Troy, without realizing how much they had chipped away at my sense of self. My therapist often reminded me that relationships are built on mutual respect, not one-sided devotion. Those words stuck with me, echoing in my mind long after each session ended. But as much as I tried to focus on healing myself, there was still the matter of Lila, and whatever lingering connection she had to Troy. It wasn't just about closure anymore. It was about understanding the full scope of what I'd been blind to. So when a mutual acquaintance casually mentioned over coffee that Lila still worked at Troy's company, something inside me clicked. "Do you know if she talks about him?" I asked casually, stirring sugar into my latte. The acquaintance shrugged. "Not directly, but I've heard her mention his name once or twice. She seems protective of him, if anything." Protective? The word sent a chill down my spine. Was she still involved in his life? Worse yet, was she influencing him in ways I couldn't see? That night, I confronted Troy again, not out of anger this time, but out of necessity. "Is Lila still part of your world?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. He hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" Does she still have any say in your decisions? Your career?" "Us?" "No," he said quickly, too quickly. "She's just a colleague, Danielle. Nothing more." But I didn't believe him. Not entirely. Determined to uncover the truth, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Greg, Troy's boss, the same man whose ego I'd unintentionally stroked at the work party. Reaching out felt risky, but I needed answers. If anyone knew how deeply Troy's infidelity had affected his professional reputation, it would be Greg. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Greg arrived looking every bit the polished executive, though his demeanor softened when he saw me. "Danielle," he said, taking a seat across from me. "This is unexpected. I need your help," I admitted, skipping pleasantries. "I think Troy might be using Lila or letting her use him to undermine me professionally. Do you know anything about that?" Greg frowned, clearly uncomfortable. After a pause, he leaned forward. "Look, I don't want to overstep, but yes, there have been whispers. People saying Troy's been subtly discrediting your contributions during team meetings. He's never outright accused you of anything, but the implications are there." My blood ran cold. All this time, I'd assumed Troy's betrayal was confined to our personal lives, but now I realized it extended far beyond that. It seeped into everything we'd built together. When I got home, I called Troy into the living room. His expression shifted from confusion to unease as I handed him a folder containing screenshots of Lila's texts, notes from my conversation with Greg, and a list of instances where I suspected he'd sabotaged my standing at work. "What is this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "This is proof," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Proof that you've been lying to me, manipulating me, and trying to control the narrative around us. You didn't just cheat on me, Troy. You tried to erase me." For once, he had no defense, no excuses. Just silence. And in that silence, I found my power. "I'm considering separating," I told him, watching as the color drained from his face. "Not because I hate you, but because I deserve better than this. Better than you." His desperation surfaced immediately. "Danielle, please, we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." But I shook my head. "It's too late for that. Maybe someday you'll understand why." As I walked away, leaving him standing there stunned, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being alone. In fact, I welcomed it. Because sometimes, turning the tables isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming yourself. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change, each day bringing me closer to a version of myself I barely recognized, but one I liked more with every passing moment. I filed for separation, hired a lawyer who specialized in cases involving workplace sabotage, and began documenting every interaction Troy had attempted to twist against me. It wasn't easy. The process forced me to confront years of buried resentment and insecurity. But with each step forward, I felt lighter, as if I was shedding layers of someone else's expectations and reclaiming my own identity. Troy, predictably, fought back at first. He begged, pleaded, even tried to guilt-trip me into staying by invoking memories of our early days together. "Remember Paris?" he'd say, his voice trembling. "Or that summer we spent road-tripping across the country? Don't throw all of that away." But those memories no longer held the same weight they once did. They weren't anchors tying me to him. They were reminders of what we used to be, not what we had become. And while part of me mourned the loss of that life, another part celebrated its end. When I finally arranged a meeting with Greg, the man whose ego I'd accidentally flattered months ago, I walked into his office feeling nothing but calm determination. Gone was the woman who had laughed nervously at parties, trying too hard to fit in. In her place stood someone stronger, surer, and unafraid to speak her truth. "Danielle," Greg said as I took a seat across from him. "To what do I owe this visit?" "I came to clear my name," I replied, sliding a folder across his desk. Inside were detailed notes, emails, and screenshots, proving how Troy had undermined me professionally, often using Lila as an intermediary. "I know you've heard rumors about my competence, but let me assure you, none of them are true. This is the work of a man desperate to protect his pride and his secrets." Greg flipped through the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finally looked up, there was a mix of regret and resolve in his eyes. "I'll take care of it," he said firmly. "You have my word." True to his promise, Greg acted swiftly. Within days, Troy was called into an emergency meeting with HR, where he was confronted with the evidence I'd provided. By the end of the week, he was fired, not just for his infidelity, which violated company policy, but for the calculated way he damaged my reputation to cover his tracks. The ID. News spread quickly, and though I knew people would gossip, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable. As the dust settled, I moved out of the house we'd shared and into a cozy apartment downtown. The space was small but bright, with large windows that let in sunlight all day long. I painted the Kai walls soft shades of blue and green, hung my artwork on every available surface, and filled the shelves with books I'd always meant to read, but never had time for. One evening, as I sat on the balcony sipping tea and watching the city lights twinkle below, I realized something profound. I wasn't broken anymore. Yes, the marriage had ended, and yes, the betrayal still stung. But instead of letting those wounds define me, I'd use them to rebuild myself into someone stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, a message from an old friend inviting me to join her book club. I smiled as I typed out my response. Count me in. For so long, I'd lived my life orbiting around Troy, shaping myself to fit his needs and ambitions. Now, I was learning to stand firmly in my own center, to create a life that reflected who I truly was, not who I thought I should be. As I leaned back in my chair, the cool night air brushing against my skin, I allowed myself a quiet moment of triumph. The journey ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to face it head on, because sometimes breaking apart isn't the end, it's the beginning of something far better.